The United States doesn't run on money. It runs on a promise. We are taught to believe that the engine of the American empire is fueled by industry, innovation, and the taxes collected from its citizens. But this is merely a public-facing narrative, a carefully constructed facade that conceals a far more powerful and far more precarious mechanism. The true engine isn't production. It is debt. It is a system where money is created from nothing, backed only by the promise that it will one day be repaid. This is the story of the bond trick, the hidden architecture of modern American power. The common understanding of a nation's finances is simple. The government collects taxes and tariffs, and it spends that revenue on public services, infrastructure, and defense. When there is a shortfall, it borrows. But this textbook model fails to capture the sheer scale and circular logic of the current American financial system. The reality is that the U.S. government doesn't primarily fund itself through what it earns or what it collects. It funds itself by issuing debt, a continuous stream of promises sold to the world, and, most critically, to itself. This is not a supplement to the economy. It has become the economy itself. To understand this mechanism, you must look at the relationship between two of the most powerful institutions on earth, the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. The Treasury, in need of cash to fund everything from Social Security to aircraft carriers, issues bonds. These bonds are nothing more than sophisticated IOUs, promises to pay back a lender with interest at a future date. In a normal market, these would be sold to private investors, corporations, and foreign governments. But this is not a normal market. Herein lies the trick. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, steps in as the ultimate buyer. With the authority to create money at will, it purchases these treasury bonds, not with existing savings, but with brand new dollars conjured into existence on a digital ledger. This new money then flows into the Treasury's account, ready to be spent. A closed loop is formed. The government borrows money that the central bank creates, effectively allowing the nation to borrow from a future version of itself. It is a financial perpetual motion machine, seemingly stable, but utterly dependent on a force more fragile than any metal or machine: belief. The system was not born overnight. Its foundations were laid in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, an institution designed to stabilize a volatile banking sector, but which would evolve to become the government's primary financier. For decades, its power was constrained by the gold standard, a tether that linked the value of the dollar to a finite physical asset. A dollar was not just a piece of paper. It was a claim on a specific amount of gold held in the nation's vaults. This discipline, however, could not survive the pressures of global conflict. The immense financial demands of World War I and later World War II forced governments to spend far beyond their means. To fund these colossal undertakings, bond issuance exploded, stretching the limits of the gold standard to its breaking point. The tether was fraying. The final, decisive snap came in 1971. When President Richard Nixon, facing dwindling gold reserves and international pressure, unilaterally severed the dollar's last link to gold. From that moment on, the U.S. dollar was a pure fiat currency, its value determined not by a tangible asset, but by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Money was now backed by nothing but a promise. The bond trick was now unrestrained. The modern era has only deepened this dependency, transforming it from a tool of crisis management into a permanent feature of the financial landscape. The 2008 financial crisis saw the introduction of a new term into the public lexicon: quantitative easing, or QE. In response to a collapsing housing market and frozen credit, the Federal Reserve initiated a massive bond-buying program, injecting trillions of newly created dollars into the financial system to save it from itself. What was framed as an emergency measure never truly ended. The cycle repeated with even greater force in 2020. As the world locked down in response to the pandemic, the Fed unleashed an unprecedented wave of monetary creation to prop up the economy. Each crisis, it seemed, could only be solved with a larger dose of the same medicine: more debt, more bond buying, more digital money creation. The system was no longer just a feature of the economy. It had become a self-feeding loop where the solution to every problem was to expand the illusion. This intricate dance of debt creation gives the appearance of immaculate control. Interest rates are managed, markets are stabilized, and crises are averted. The U.S. government appears to possess an infinite credit card, capable of funding any expenditure without immediate consequence. But this stability is an illusion. constructed entirely from confidence. The system works because investors, nations, and citizens believe that a U.S. Treasury bond is the safest asset in the world. They believe the dollar will hold its value. It is a system built not on concrete foundations, but on collective psychology. When that belief falters, the entire edifice risks collapse. Moreover, this cycle is not a neutral process. It is an engine of immense wealth transfer. When the Federal Reserve creates new money to buy bonds, that money enters the economy at the top. It flows first to the large financial institutions, the primary dealers who sell the bonds. It inflates the value of assets like stocks and real estate owned disproportionately by the wealthy. The first recipients of this new money get to spend it before it has circulated widely and caused prices to rise. This is the Cantillon effect in action. By the time this new money trickles down to the average citizen, its purchasing power has already been diluted. They do not experience it as newfound wealth, but as inflation, the rising cost of groceries, gas, and housing. The bond trick silently siphons wealth upward, from the wage earner to the asset owner, from Main Street to Wall Street. It is a hidden tax on the poor and the middle class, widening the chasm of inequality with every new bond the Fed purchases. The genius of this system is its global reach. The United States has weaponized its debt, turning it into the primary export that underpins its empire. Because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, nations around the globe must hold dollars to conduct international trade. They park these dollars in the safest dollar-denominated asset they can find, U.S. Treasury bonds. In doing so, countries like China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia become lenders to the United States. They are, in effect, funding the very system that grants America its global power. They are financing the U.S. military budget, its consumer spending, and its technological dominance. The United States doesn't need to conquer territories to build an empire. It builds it with paper. It exports its debt and, in return, imports real goods, services, and geopolitical leverage. It is a financial empire without precedent, one maintained not by legions on the ground, but by ledgers in the cloud. But a system built on ever-expanding debt is inherently fragile. For decades, the growth of U.S. debt has outpaced the growth of its real economy, the part that makes and sells actual things. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. As the debt pile grows, the interest payments on that debt become a larger and larger portion of the federal budget, requiring the issuance of even more debt simply to service the old. Each crisis, whether financial, medical, or geopolitical, now demands a more extreme intervention from the Federal Reserve. The system has become addicted to its own medicine, and the dosages are getting larger. At its core, the entire global financial order rests on a single, fragile pillar: trust. Trust in the dollar as a stable store of value. Trust in the U.S. government's ability and willingness to honor its debts. Trust that the promise will be kept. For generations, this trust has been uncheckable, the bedrock of global finance. But as the debt-to-GDP ratio soars to historic highs, and as monetary creation becomes the default solution to every problem, that faith is beginning to show cracks. Rival powers are exploring alternatives, and central banks are diversifying their reserves. The foundation is subtly, but undeniably, shifting. This perpetual borrowing machine has created a profound moral hazard. The knowledge that the Federal Reserve will always step in to backstop the system encourages reckless behavior. Corporations take on excessive debt, knowing a bailout is likely if things go wrong. Banks make speculative bets, confident that they are too big to fail. This cycle privatizes gains and socializes losses, rewarding the architects of financial instability while the real economy bears the long-term cost. It is a system that fosters asset inflation over genuine production, speculation over innovation. Every empire in history that has financed itself through debt has eventually faced a day of reckoning, from ancient Rome debasing its currency to the Spanish Empire defaulting on its loans. The laws of financial gravity are patient, but they are unforgiving. The bond trick has allowed the United States to defy those laws for a century, building a global empire on a mountain of promises. But the illusion cannot last forever. Understanding this mechanism is not about inducing panic. It is about achieving clarity. It is about recognizing the illusion for what it is before the world does. The end game is not a certainty, but the question it poses is inescapable. The modern American empire is sustained by a loop of self-funded promises, a spectacle of financial power that mesmerizes the globe. Yet, as the promises multiply faster than the reality they are meant to represent, the spectacle becomes more fragile. We are left with a single haunting inquiry that will define the 21st century. How long can a nation keep buying its own promises before the world stops believing?